we'll begin the second of two panels this afternoon. This one is on the tools and tips for your next steps to career success, stories of getting hired. And so joining me this afternoon is a majority of hiring managers and recruiters from Abiomed. So working from my right, your left, we've got Abby, Allie, Heather, John, and Greg. And so they're going to share their stories. I'll ask them to just kind of start off with Abby and kind of introduce themselves, their role here in Abiomed. And, you know, just I've asked them as kind of a up front, I've asked them to, you know, challenge. And as I talked about earlier, you know, mentors are meant to challenge whatever your perspective is that you thought coming in to a new career, to force you to see things through a different lens. And so, you know, some of the rules up front were no thin skins. So you're going to hear stories, you know, names and experiences to be protected, but you know, this is to benefit the veterans that are in transition and getting through to that next level, getting from the resume to the interview. And so they're willing to share those stories. And as I said, afterwards, there'll be the resume workshop and one-on-one with not just mentors, but them as well. So starting with Abby, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abigail Bartley, Abby, and I'm a senior recruiter here at Abiomed. I primarily support and lead manufacturing and engineering recruiting, along with some other functions sprinkled in. I've been recruiting for about 15 years across different industries, you know, telecom, life sciences, med device. So really excited to be here with you all and here at Abiomed.
Great. I'm Allison Jean. I'm also a senior recruiter here at Abiomed. I've been with Abiomed now just for about 2 years, and I support mostly marketing and sales and also a few other fun things sprinkled in. I've been recruiting now for about 8 years. I started in automotive and then went into life sciences and now in med device. But I am really excited to be here with all of you as well.
Hi, I'm Heather Pothier. I'm the Director of U.S. Production, so I oversee the manufacturing here in Danvers. So first off, I'd like to thank you guys very much for your service. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity for you guys to go into the industry because we've had some great people, Greg, Mike, I don't know if Chris is still in the room, that have transitioned, and it's been a huge benefit to Abiomed. So I look forward to helping anyone with their transition as well, if I can help answer questions and things. I've been with Abiomed for 7 years now. I've had 3 different roles in those 7 years. So you always have to be willing to change things and try new things. And you can have the opportunity to experience different areas of the company. My hiring that I do ranges quite a bit because I oversee the clean rooms and the non-clean room manufacturing. So I can hire people that are hourly workers doing manual assembly work, all the way up to production managers and supervisors, so more of the professional staff as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions around the gamut of the type of hiring that I might be doing.
John Lefavour, I'm Associate Director of NPI. That's the group that stands between manufacturing and research and development to kind of transition products out of development into manufacturing. Been at Abiomed about 1 year, actually 1 year last week. About 20 years in the industry, most of which has been spent in the medical device industry. An engineer by trade, and the folks that I hire are normally engineers and professional staff.
Hey guys, I'm Greg Eichmann. I've met a few of you earlier, but for the rest, I look forward to speaking with you later on today. I've been here at Abiomed for about 4.5 years. Prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps for close to 10 years. I was a C-130 pilot in the Marine Corps, mostly on the West Coast. And did about 4 deployments in that amount of time and did some other things sprinkled in before I made my transition back in 2014. Here at Abiomed, I've primarily been a program manager within engineering, leading teams of various sizes and employees of various backgrounds. And recently I've moved into more of an operationally focused role here at Abiomed. So I'm happy to be here with you guys and share my experiences either with hiring, recruiting, or just the transition in general.
Awesome. Well, thanks. So the first question, and I'll start with Greg, is as you prepare for a hiring panel, could you talk about some of the preparation that you go through personally as you're given a packet from HR and the recruiters, and then as it moves down the line to the recruitment team, what are you doing in preparation to set conditions as before you hand off a packet to panelists? So, Greg?
Sure. If I'm asked to be on some type of hiring panel and I receive an invite for a interview as well as kind of a resume, what I typically will do first is look at the resume. I'll spend some time just looking at its format. I'll try to get a better understanding of how someone's professional career has progressed. I usually like starting towards the end, and the end is fun for me because typically people will put in things like not only their education but their hobbies. So it's really easy to read a resume and get a feel for, I shouldn't say really easy, but it's easier to get a feel for some of their professional experiences, but I also want to try to get to know them as a person, and that continues on certainly with the interview. But I will go through the resume, try to get an idea of what companies, what size companies, what kind of work they did. I might go on the internet and look up the company if I've never heard of it before. I'm not afraid of going on LinkedIn and looking the person up directly just to see again, try to learn as much as I can about them. And then I'll just start coming up with some real generic questions. Just, again, not only to understand more about their professional career, but when that time comes for me to either be on the phone with them or be in front of them in a face-to-face interview, I want to know about your professional experiences, but I want to also get to know you as a person. So that's typically what I would do. I try to spend at least 30 to 45 minutes at least in terms of preparation before an interview.
Great, thanks. John?
Yeah, so some of the things that Greg mentioned are pretty common, do some of the same, but I'll spend some time reviewing the resume against the CTQs, critical to qualities of the role, to make sure that the experience is applicable. Also looking for progression, looking for somebody who's throughout his or her career kind of moved through a number of different roles, both in terms of hierarchy in the organization and breadth of experience. I'll also often go onto LinkedIn just to check the person's social media profile out, because sometimes those things differ. And usually going into an interview, I'll spend some time annotating the resume so I kind of know which questions to ask. I'll pick a few key points, because what I'm generally looking for is not just what the resume says, but how you explain the details in the resume. We talked about challenging sometimes. It's really easy to put a bunch of numbers and experiences on a piece of paper, but how you recount those experiences, how you talk about them, the way you speak about them is important to me.
So they covered quite a bit already. I was going to bring up the I was going to bring up the CTQs as well. So the critical to quality. So if the role is in my area, so I'll be developing kind of the job requisition. I'll look at the job description and determine what are the critical technical skills a person might need, as well as what are the critical soft skills that a person might need. So that is what gets built into the CTQs. And we actually weight those, so I know going into the interview what are the most important things for this particular role. Some cases I may have to adapt to the weighting depending upon how well my team is already built out. I may be looking for more weighting in a particular area. So I might be looking for a particular person that has really strong soft skills, and their technical skills may not be as important at that particular time. So I'll do that well in front of preparing for the interview. And then I will review the resume, similar to what others said, but I'll also highlight on my CTQ checklist certain areas where I need to probe deep. Like, okay, their resume doesn't tell me quite what I'm looking for to be able to score them, so how do I know, can they do this particular skill? So I'll drive a little deeper in those areas. And it's also helpful to pre-write my questions out so that I make sure I stay on point with what I'm trying to get out of the interview. And I'll always try and find some common ground so that when we start the interview, we can have a nice, more casual conversation to put the interviewer at ease so that they're a little more comfortable in the environment, and we can get rid of the nerves pretty quickly that way.
So similar to kind of what Heather said, and I think in our role as recruiters, we're making sure those candidates are strong enough to pass over to the hiring manager. So what we really are looking at is kind of the skill set matched to that job description. But something that I really like to do in that first conversation with candidates is put them at ease kind of right off the bat. Is just, I'm here to learn more about you. It's okay to be comfortable with me and tell me kind of, maybe questions you might have on the job, but also, just kind of really making sure that we still hit the technical information, but at the same time learning about some of those soft skills so we can then prep the hiring managers for maybe where they need to dig deeper or whatnot as well.
Absolutely, and I think, so we've talked about a couple of common themes here today. You guys have heard a lot about the why and about preparedness, and I think that is sort of a two-way street when it comes to hiring, right? You need to prepare for your job search in figuring out what it is that you really want to do, what excites you. We as recruiters take a lot of care and thought into preparing our search with the hiring team. So we really are trying more and more with every day, in the spirit of perfection, to build a solid partnership from the start. Find out what's important to the hiring manager, what skills from a soft skill standpoint that person needs to succeed in the role, because we want to set people up for success as well. What are they going to be looking for technical skills and why, right? So that context is important to us. And the goal, as Allison said, we want to be a great partner for you as the candidate as well, and be able to help you figure out if it is or is not the right fit from the start. And if it is, great, we get into the interview process and we start to try to prepare some questions, behavioral questions that might help our interview team get examples from your past experience. And I think for you all, that's critical because while you might not have experience doing X, Y, and Z, you've got a scenario that you can speak to that relays a skill you might have in a particular area that's important to us. So if we ask a question that asks for an example of grit, for example, like Alessandra talked about, you can probably speak to that even though it's not Abiomed specific.
Yeah, one of the key themes that I thought was interesting across that the panelists talked about was the congruence between the resume and the CTQs. And so, a big takeaway that I learned in my transition a year ago, putting out multiple resumes, is the tailoring of that, and that it's not one size fits all. And if you're really aggressively pursuing a position or in a career field that you love, put the time and energy, because it's very clear that they're looking at the whole person. If you don't put that time and energy into it, it's going to show just point blank in the face when you're looking at, well, there's absolutely no matches here. I don't understand, where we're at. And so your soft skills better be off the charts. And your ability to adapt to the organization is, your learning curve is maybe sharp, but you got to bring out your adaptability, your malleability, your flexibility and bring it home in the interview, I would assume, to make up for that if there is a shortcoming and you've made it to the panel part. So it's great feedback. Thank you for sharing all. So the next question I'd like to just bring up to everybody is, we talked about the why, the congruence of personal values to the value within an organization. If you would all share, something a best practice, if you will, that you've observed on how a candidate has expressed their value added to the organization in a panel. And so I'll kind of start down at the end and work my way back across, or, what is a best practice you've seen in your experience?
Great question. It's really hard to narrow it down to one, but I think in the spirit of today's discussions, you all heard Mike talk about something earlier, right? And he said that you should feel comfortable giving your pitch and then say, and that's why I'm here. My advice is always paint that picture for the hiring team, because if you're having the conversation, there's a baseline level of qualification to begin with, right? And so they already want you to be a good fit for the job. Help them connect the dots. If I can, I'll point out Sue Davis, who was one of, who spoke to you recently. I hired Sue here, and she did an amazing job connecting the dots for me, explaining and translating her experience and why it was potentially a really great fit for this senior business analyst role here at Abiomed. So having that story, a truthful story, but making sure that you take time and care into coming up with that value proposition and then being able to communicate it effectively, and also sort of do a back brief, right? Ask if there are any questions. Can I clarify for you in any other way to make sure that your intent was really clear in the interview? I think that's important.
I think that's a great point. And one of the things that I am always so impressed with candidates on is when you can tell they take the time to really research the company, but also the people. More and more on my hiring teams, I get the statement as they're walking in the door, oh, I saw that they checked me out on LinkedIn. And then those conversations that you're having in those interviews, it shows that you're already invested in them as an interviewer, but you also have a little bit of insight into their background background, and maybe you can find that common ground before you actually walk into the interview. And that can really help you then relay your story specifically not only to the company but also the person that you're speaking with as well, as to why you would be a best fit for this role, but then also, you know, how you'd help them in their role too. And I think that's where you really see that preparedness come through, and it really can help not only sell your story, and then you're kind of talking about your story in a little bit of a different way to each interviewer, but the message is still the same, the reason why you're here and why you're passionate to be here as well.
I'd say for myself, passion is one of the big things, because in order to work at a company like Abiomed, people have to be extremely passionate about what they do. And if somebody can relate their personal passion, whether it's from work or outside of work in an interview, it helps you get to know the person better and what drives that person. And then you can translate that into how their past skill sets can be utilized with that passion that they have and how they can bring value to the company.
And boy, these questions get really hard as you get on the line here, so all the good answers are taken. You know, I was going to talk about passion, also ability to kind of parlay and describe your maybe apparently unrelated experiences as they pertain to the new role. But for me, all that stuff actually, it kind of speaks to your passion. You know, if you're a person who sprays and prays with resumes, just sends the same resume out to a bunch of different companies, shows up and says, that's me, and really doesn't have that pitch that apparently Mike talked about, it's not tailored to an individual company, you know, that's not somebody that I'd want in my organization. To me, the passion as you kind of come in the door, you know, tailoring your resume, tailoring your elevator pitch, and coming in and saying, here's my value proposition. Those are all the things that convince me that you're a person that can really take any task and just drive it to completion. So I think passion is the biggest thing, you know, showing passion.
Yeah, you weren't kidding. This is getting harder. I think I don't want to repeat anything that's already been said. I would emphasize kind of the narrative. I think if you're really good at telling your story and you're telling it your own way. So I always tell people, you know, you want to practice your story, but you don't want to over practice your story. You don't want to sound robotic, because again, for me, when I'm sitting in front of you doing an interview, I want to try to get to know the real you. And so I want to hear you tell me this story, and you can practice. I know Mike had mentioned practicing with his wife. You can practice with friends. I'd probably recommend someone that doesn't know you, so that if you start going down the path of maybe using too many military acronyms or sayings or things like that, they could just say, okay, you lost me. So practicing that narrative is really important. We had mentioned passion. I also look for just a lot of enthusiasm and motivation in an interview. And that's not only from your words, but that's also from your body language. You know, if you're leaning in, if you're smiling, if you're making eye contact, if you're showing, I've done the research on the company, I've done the research on the product, I've looked you up on LinkedIn, I understand how my network interacts with this company that's here, I have a decent understanding for the job description, please tell me more. If someone comes in and they're showing that excitement to me, I get excited by sitting there and talking to them about the opportunity. So that I've seen that kind of in terms of the best interviews and the best way to present.
Just one more thing. I think relatability is key. You know, early in my career, I'd go into an interview all nervous because I thought that it was only about, you know, them evaluating me for the position, and it's really a two-way conversation, right? Yep. And for me, as a supervisor of people, I want someone who's got the right skill sets. I want someone who's got passion, but I'd say even, well, almost as important as those things, I want somebody with whom I can have an open and honest relationship and conversation, somebody who's a person that I can relate to, and somebody who can look me in the eye and challenge me, and I can look in the eye and challenge them, and just have kind of an equal footing. So relatability is key. You know, a lot of folks get nervous. I mean, some of the worst interviews I've seen were when people were just totally uncomfortable in their own skin. They came in nervous and sometimes sweaty, as crazy as that sounds, and it was just like, you know, this guy or gal could be, you know, a PhD in whatever, and it wouldn't even matter because they just weren't relatable and they couldn't carry on a regular, calm conversation. You know, it's a two-way conversation. You're assessing us as much as we're assessing you.
Abby, I think you had something else.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of piggyback on all of these comments, but especially Greg's. I think that, you know, the other thing I would say is be confident, right? So, and be authentic. I think authenticity comes from being confident, which also then generates more authenticity. I mean, you guys, to be honest, are more prepared for a job than many people in the professional world, just based on your training, based on the soft skills that you have. So, you know, don't overthink it, but make sure that you've done a good job to sort of really understand from yourself what you love and be authentic about that. And if you don't overthink it, then that confidence shines through, and that makes a huge impression in an interview.
Yeah, so again, themes as I scribble down notes in rapid succession. We talk about owning the narrative, owning your value proposition. It goes back to what's at your core, what's going to continue to inspire and fuel the passion inside of you, and then being able to effectively communicate that in your sound bites, 30 seconds or more. We talked about, preparedness. Well, having just transitioned, I know, and as you heard Mike talk about his tactical plan and everyone in Abiomed knowing it, if you were in the uniform within the last 3 or 4 years, and I'll just use the Army as the example, the number one priority was readiness. And the number one thing every person on this panel has talked about is preparedness for that panel. Again, just being able to translate, we've been doing this the whole time while we've been in uniform. We've been focused on readiness, that same level of intensity in maintaining readiness in uniform is the same level of attention to detail and readiness you need to put into that resume for that specific opportunity and job in a career field that you're passionate about, as well as the preparation that goes into making sure you're as ready as you can be for that hiring panel. So thank you very much for sharing all those sustains. Now, we're going to use the AAR format, so we're going to talk about improves next. And so we want to hear some mistakes and experiences and faux pas, if you will, that you've seen, whether it's in written form or at an actual panel. And it could be anything from again, speech to dress to how they present. And so we'll start and work our way down and just give one example. So then there's, because I'm sure there's probably more war stories than anything else. But please proceed, Greg.
Yeah, I think probably what I have seen is, and we've talked about preparation, right? Knowing your narrative and getting ready for an interview and telling those stories. I think what I've seen is just kind of really telling me how important that is sometimes, or I should say, you guys are going to get a lot of behavioral questions. You're going to get a lot of questions about, tell me about a time you did this, and tell me about a time you did that. And there are a number of different ways that you can respond to those questions, different formats that you can see. I've heard bottom line up front and other things in terms of responding to a question. Practice that, because I think the challenge that I've seen sometimes in interviews is someone starting to answer a question and then they go on and go on and go on and go on. And then you lose the person. I think it's important absolutely to provide some context, start telling the story a little bit, but through your practice, really try to focus in on, I'm only going to take 15, 20, 30 seconds, something like that, to help kind of paint the picture for the person. This one time when I was here with my unit doing the following, this occurred, and then my action went from there. If you're able to respond to something within 2.5 minutes, in my opinion, I think you're doing a pretty good job. Sometimes people try to throw in too many details, and that 2.5 minutes then goes to 4, goes to 5. And you can actually see the interviewer their body language might shift a little bit. They might kind of drone out, and then they're not really listening anymore. So I think it's really imperative that as you're responding to these questions, especially behavioral-based questions, that you practice and you try to limit yourself to a specific amount of time and really get your point across.
Yeah, I'd say it comes down to preparedness, and I hope I'm not stealing your example. We had a gentleman a while back who he was recently out of a job and started looking, and he got a bunch of feedback in his resume, and he got a bunch of offers for job interviews. And I guess it falls under preparedness because he had really tried to pack too much into one day. He had come from a morning interview that went over, and he showed up at our place, and he just wasn't ready, and he was nervous and uncomfortable. And a career is important, getting a job's important, but always come forth with your best self. You guys have a lot of training, you know what it takes to be in your best condition, and biting off too much in one day. If you've got a job interview that's potentially, it's nominally 4 hours and it might go to 5 or 6, don't plan another one for the afternoon. Make sure you've got the time to give and that you're your best self for every interview, because I think he could have done better in our interview had he not rushed in, rushed out. So
I would say one of the critical mistakes people have made on interviews with me is not really understanding what the job is that they're coming to interview for, being very far off base. So there's one thing to read a job description online, and I understand that it may not always tell the full story, but you have to get a really good sense of what the company's looking for, and even look at job descriptions with similar titles at other companies to pick up other keywords that might help for that role. I recently had a person interviewing for a supervisor role. In most of the interview, they talked about how they love to be hands-on, and they just love to build things and take things apart, which is great for a calibration person or a maintenance person or an assembler, but a supervisor, you're trying to step away from that role. So it made me wonder, did this person really know what the role was about, and would they be happy in the role? That was the other thing I was trying to evaluate. If they loved being hands-on, and I knew this role was not meant to be hands-on, would they truly be satisfied if we even did make them an offer for the role? So really know what you're applying for and think about, is this a fit for me, and will I be passionate about this job when I'm in it?
I think that's a great point. I mean, you know, from an interview side and an interviewee side, I think if you're not truthful about if this role works or doesn't work, and it's just like, I'm so desperate for a job, it comes through. And so it's really being truthful, through the whole interview process at any point. I'm both with kind of the hiring team, and, you know, if you have questions about the role, or maybe you do say, for example, kind of as Heather was, you know, saying, I'm not, you know, this role isn't super hands-on or things like that. You know, be upfront and say, oh, I'm not sure if this might not be a great fit then. You know, and I think kind of being really truthful throughout that whole process is really helpful, because your story will start to unravel during an interview process when there are 5 people asking you kind of the same question and things like that. Something will be picked up, and then all of a sudden, you know, that story starts to unravel. So that would probably be my recommendation.
That's a great point, and I think that also kind of ties in with that authenticity piece. Like, know yourself. If it's not for you, then be honest with yourself too, in addition to the hiring team. A lot of people have talked about the actual interview process. I think, you know, one thing to think about also is like your written communication throughout the interview process. A lot of hiring managers like to see thank you notes, so don't be shy asking for people's business cards or their email addresses at the end of the interview. Also, and I've seen this before, have a sense of awareness in regards to how you're coming across in writing throughout the process. I had one candidate who had an email address that was probably inappropriate. It was a personal email address, but the handle itself was not an appropriate choice, in my opinion, for what an employer should see. So think about how you're going to be viewed to that potential employer. You know, use spell check. Make sure that you're thanking someone for the right opportunity and at the right company, because all it takes in the job search grind is just a quick mistake, and you can't get that email back. So just take the extra 2 minutes to consider the written communication.
This is great. You know, one theme, and going back to the program, and you know, where MVP Vets is cornerstone is on the mentorship. And so, you know, to the veterans in transition, the key is a lot of the practice, the rehearsals for the interview, the screening, the congruence in the resume to make sure it's tailored. If you don't expand your network, you don't ask for perspectives from those that are already in the industry, and you have knowledge gaps and you don't quite understand what job you're actually applying for, that's what we've got industry mentors out there to help you. So you're going with a understanding of what you're applying for and what you're going to get into to make sure that it's fitting with the passion that you have, and that it's going to be congruent with the organization and the culture that you want to be a part of. And so take that opportunity. Again, it goes back to making sure you're as ready as you can be and provide that competitive advantage for yourself. There's people there. You just got to make the ask. And again, that's something that is somewhat counterintuitive within our culture that you've got to really come to grips with as part of your transition. So thank you for sharing that. There's been a question that's a question about a question, really, is how I'll rephrase that. And there is oftentimes an opportunity where whether it's over the phone, it could be over FaceTime or Skype, or actually at a panel where the candidate has an opportunity to ask a question. What do you believe would be good questions that a candidate can ask of the panel? Part of that I know is going to go into the preparedness side of the house, but what have you heard, as some best practices are really thought-provoking that are just like, wow, like I didn't see that one coming, and this really impacted me and separated this candidate from another candidate?
I think some of the questions I've had are related towards the end of the interview. One that caught me, and I thought was a really good one, is there anything you've heard me say or seen on my resume that you think would lead you to believe I'm not the ideal candidate for the job? Because it gives you that opportunity to back brief and clarify something or go deeper into a certain area. And it also puts the interviewer a little bit like, okay, I have to pause and think because I want to make sure I answer correctly, don't lead somebody on as well. And then another really strong one that I've had is, what are the success factors that this person needs to show to make sure in the first 30 days they're successful in their job? Or what are the criteria that I need to do to be successful?
I would say also too, show your hiring manager or your hiring team that you care about what's important to them. So sort of, similarly related, but I have heard candidates ask, what are the most important objectives that you want your team to complete this year, if they haven't already spoken to that. Ask questions that give your interviewer a sense that you want to help them achieve their goals as a team, and that you're already thinking proactively about how you can contribute to that team's success.
I also think, just kind of in the theme of preparedness as well, is thinking about different questions for each person that you are interviewing. I have an example of someone that asked a VP, hey, can you tell me about your benefits? That's not the right question to ask a VP, right? So really kind of take a step back and think, thinking about, what questions would match the person that you're interviewing. And I personally suggest having 2 to 3 questions for each interviewer. Some of them can be very similar. The question you gave Heather is one that I love to hear from candidates. What concerns do you have, or anything I could do differently, or fill you in on my background? Because sometimes interviewers may just have such an agenda that they're missing parts that you guys actually have. So it helps open up that dialogue. But I think also asking about kind of culture and what's expected. Those are all really, really important questions of a hiring team, of a teammate, of a hiring manager, or a, kind of a manager's manager as well.
Want me to go? Okay. Well, I agree with Heather's point. I think I love being asked, what does success look like in this role? I think that's an awesome question. The other part is not so much a specific question, but I really enjoy the follow-up question. So you can prepare for an interview and have 5 to 10 questions written out so that you're ready to go. And if someone were to ask me a question in my response, they then ask another question based on my response, it shows me 2 things. 1, you're interested, and 2, you're actively listening. And that's sometimes really hard to do in an interview because you get a little bit nervous and maybe you're thinking, I got to get this question in, and then I got to get to the next question and then the next one. If you ask me a follow-on question based on my response, that's showing me that you're listening, you're engaged in the conversation, and you have a genuine interest. So I really like hearing that.
Yeah, I think the success factors one is huge. It's a great one. But one of the best questions I ever got from a candidate, and it was actually at my last role, and I hired this guy, and I'd like to hire him again, was tell me why you're passionate about the company you're working for. He kind of pushed it on me, because I've asked that question of most candidates. Why do you want to be here? What interests you about Abiomed or Company X? He asked this question of me, is why are you here? What are you passionate about? Kind of asking me politely to sell the opportunity and sell the company to him. And luckily, I've worked at places where that was very easy. So.
And I would also encourage, so yes, definitely have different questions. To Allison's point, you don't want to sort of ask everyone the same general questions. Consider your audience. But John's question, I would encourage everyone to ask that of everyone on your interview panel. It'll help you as the candidate, right? As you interview the potential company that you're considering joining, understand whether it's the right fit for you. Are you hearing wildly different answers? Are you hearing different perspectives? It gives you data points as well that are really helpful.
Great, awesome, thank you. So we're going to transition to questions from the field now. So I'll pause here and send it out to those in transition. Todd, go ahead.
This can be for anybody. It's like, what are some of the behavioral questions that we should be prepared for?
So I kind of always say they fall into these groups, but you want to think about one of your more difficult situations that you've had to go through and maybe you haven't succeeded in, and be able to kind of explain that really well. And then also kind of what is your most successful situation and why are you proud of that, and what skills did you use in order for that success. I think those kind of buckets and having those examples really prepared will help get you through a lot of the behavioral questions we're going to ask. And also kind of informal leadership is going to be a big topic that comes up in almost any interview. You know, how have you demonstrated leadership when you're not directly managing something? Something that will definitely come up as well.
And I'll jump off that one a little bit. I mean, you asked it very politely, but I kind of intentionally asked that first question pretty bluntly. I say, tell me about a failure. Tell me about a time when you've screwed up, and tell me how you handled it. And what I'm really looking for is ownership, right? Pain is our greatest teacher, they say. You know, learn most from your mistakes. I look back on my career, and I have learned the most from times when I failed, and I have been patted on the back end or promoted from times when I said, hey, I own this, I screwed up, let me fix it. So you know, I asked that question really bluntly, and you should be prepared for that, because it's a question that needs to be asked, right? It's a judge of character type question. So.
And don't shy away from the negative questions, because I would say that like behavioral interviewing does focus heavily on what you've learned, right, or what was the outcome, and a fair amount of them are focused on something that didn't go well. So don't shy away from that. It's good to be able to respond to that. But also too, generally, the format of behavioral interview questions, and Allison knows this too, is it'll typically ask you for a few different key things. You know, what was the situation? What was your response to that situation? And then what was the result? So that somebody can see how you kind of worked through a particular situation, and if anything was learned from it.
Excellent. Kim?
So 2 questions, cover letter, yes or no, and thank you letter, mail or email?
I'll say, what's a cover letter? I don't read them anymore. To me, they don't matter. I don't know if HR they matter. So.
I have to say, no, I tend to go right for the resume. Now, I will have a different answer to that, though. If you're reaching out to someone to network and you're asking, you know, kind of, can you take a look at this resume? And it may not be the direct hiring manager, or you're not uploading it directly to the recruiter. If you're sending it to someone in a network, I recommend kind of explaining why you're sending it. But you know, in a traditional, if you're uploading it to like an ATS, it's not really needed.
Yeah.
And excuse me, like if you're uploading your resume to a job and it's in a system.
So, and thank you letter, email or mail?
I'm a big fan of email. Yeah.
I don't even know if I have a mailbox here at Abiomed, paper mailbox.
Or I don't get to it very quickly.
I'm pretty sure I don't have one. I have no idea where it is. If you ask me to find the mailroom, I think it's over there. So it's all electronic.
I'd like to add on for the cover letter. For myself, a cover letter was particularly important because similar to probably some of what you're experiencing, my background was pretty diverse, especially when I came to Abiomed. I still have people saying, oh, that's the girl from the bank, right? Because I went from Bank of America to Abiomed, doing banking stuff to building heart pumps. So, and I've also made gelatin and made paint. So my background was really diverse, but there was a theme to all of it. And if you just looked at the resume, you may not have understood it. So the cover letter talked about the themes. I was always in a manufacturing process, always focused on quality, lean activity. So for me, it was particularly important because I had to tie all those things together. Because if somebody's just looking at the companies I worked for in a resume, they're not going to understand who I am and what I've done in the past and what my value is that I could bring to the particular company I was applying for. So I'd take a look at it from like what you're trying to do, and if you think the cover letter would add context to your background and how you can work for that company and bring value, then it might be worth it. It's a little harder with some of the online systems, though. There may not always be a place to put the cover letter.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of maybe not change my answer, but adjust it. Like, I agree with these guys. If you're trying to angle your way into a company that you have no contacts, or if you're directly contacting someone, you know, when I think cover letter, I think old school, formal, typewritten thing in a folded envelope. You've got to explain why you're sending your resume. But just for me as a hiring manager, brief, really brief, no more than 2 or 3 fingers on the screen, right? Very brief, like here's why I'm here, here's my interest in the company, and here's why I think I have a value prop. But a formal cover letter like they talked about, 20 years ago, I personally don't think that's necessary, but it sounds like it helped you quite a bit, so.
And I would agree. I would say, like, as a recruiter, there's a good chance. I hardly ever look at cover letters because most people don't include them. So there's a very good chance that if you do a cover letter, it won't be looked at, but there's also a chance that it could be. And just doing a cover letter actually might help you out, period. So a brief one, but it helps to kind of create a value proposition and a why for you with every position that you apply to. And that sets you up for success from the start, right? So whether they read it or they don't read it, it's valuable if you have the time.
Great, thanks. Go ahead, Alex.
I'll talk in the mic. This is actually a question for the recruiters on behalf of the transitioners here. How do you get through the noise? You've got so many people applying for positions, say you have hundreds. How do you get through that noise? Because I have plenty of friends that can't get past that noise.
Yeah. So, yes, you're right. We do. We look at a lot of resumes. And I think for one of the things, and I know Abby and I are definitely available later to look at resumes and one-offs as well if you guys have any questions. But really, skill set and kind of putting those things to the top, like we are so trained to be looking for certain things really fast. And so, kind of looking at those technical skills, maybe the engineering skills or anything like that. But that also goes back to kind of what we were just talking about, is that email. If you reached out to me on LinkedIn and you found my email and you're sending me an email as to why, I do take the minute to read that email, and then I do open that resume. So kind of going back to the cover letter situation, that might be something where if you're doing the research and you're really passionate about this job, find out the recruiter or the hiring manager for the role, which you can typically find out through some Googling and LinkedIn, and send it directly to them.
I was going to underscore networking because as I think back, when I started looking for a job, I decided to leave my last company and I started looking for a job and I ended up at Abiomed. I didn't have a lot of luck sending my resumes through kind of the big funnel, And I did what you said. I kind of tried to find out from people that I knew that worked at companies who I should contact. I did some Googling, and information technology is a great thing. If you Google Abiomed recruiter, you'll probably find one of these ladies' names at some point. Change it around a little bit, but you'll find it, and reach out direct. So.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn's also great with that, specifically for the professional reason. I mean, you can put in really any keyword there, and you'll see you may not know the person directly, but you might have a second or a third degree connection with them. And so then all it takes is for you to reach out to your connection that you have in common and say, can you introduce me to Abby, please?
You can even find the hiring manager.
You could do that
if you were applying for a position in NPI and you searched for NPI lead at Abiomed, my name would come up and I would read that email for sure.
The other thing I would add too, to Allison's point, we have a lot to do. Recruiter, we're good people and we want to get back to everyone, and I think it really kills us when we can't. But we also really get excited about finding that right fit for the company. So help make your own case, right? Help make our jobs a little bit easier. And that comes from the preparedness. Take a look at the job description and look at the skills that we say we're looking for. If you feel like you have those, mention those right up front. Maybe don't lead with education unless you're a new grad, right? Start with the most relevant things. We might have, to be honest, 30 seconds to a minute to go through a resume if there are a lot of applicants. So really pointing it out right up front and starting with the most important and the meat, and also keeping it brief,
I do want to make one comment though. If anyone doesn't have a LinkedIn today, I do recommend creating a LinkedIn. I know we've talked about LinkedIn a lot, but I would say as a blanket statement,
and we can help.
Yes.
We can help.
Yes.
We'll definitely help you.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to go final question, Ken.
Okay, well that's a perfect lead-in. So I talked about the professional social network, but let's be honest. Do you go to Facebook? Do you go to Instagram? Any of those? I mean, it's like the big elephant in the room. I mean,
it's a good question, ladies.
Are we
allowed to answer?
So I I would say no, I don't. I use LinkedIn. I will go to your LinkedIn profile, make it professional, make it appropriate. Don't use it as a personal social media. LinkedIn to me is that main tool. I do not go to people's Facebook or Instagrams. Unless they put it on their resume, which I don't really recommend doing unless you're going for a creative role where you want to showcase your photography or something. I really recommend kind of keeping it very business professional.
I agree. I think I can count maybe on both hands the times I've ever looked at a candidate's Facebook profile. And it's usually been if I have a question about something, or if I see somebody who looks great, but they're not responding to me on LinkedIn, I wonder maybe how I could get in contact with them alternatively. So even if the intent of the recruiter is not to find out information about you by going specifically to your Facebook profile, just always be aware. Anytime you're in a job search, as a general rule though, I do not. Good question.
Make it private though for while you're searching for jobs.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. Well, if everyone just please join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.